Keir Starmer, the Prime Minister there, is in a lot of trouble. I know you were asked about this.
Well, he's in trouble for two reasons, energy and immigration.
Do you think Starmer's going to survive as Prime Minister?
Tough thing, unless he can straighten out immigration, where he's weak, and if he doesn't start drilling, then stop with the windmills all over the place.
Well, let's check in on the UK because we have a huge update on a man who I've made fun of a lot over the past year. And that is, of course, the one and only Keir Starmer. Hopefully they don't extradite me and throw me in jail for that, but he may not be in office long enough for it to matter because it looks like Starmer may be resigning from the prime ministership very soon. That's right. He's officially giving up. At least that's what British media is currently reporting. And if true, the reasons for this shouldn't be much of a mystery. In fact, I would say it doesn't matter if he voluntarily resigns or not. His time is over one way or another because this is coming, of course, just a week after the UK council elections where his Labour Party got absolutely destroyed by the right-wingers, lost over 1,000 seats, not even making that up. And of course, today we once again had yet another Unite the Kingdom rally, which are these massive patriotic nationalist gatherings of British patriots who go to the streets in London, protest against the migration crisis, Starmer's leadership, migrant crime, economic issues, all of those things. But every single time you have hundreds of thousands to millions of people making a statement. Starmer slanders it as this far-right event, yet they keep growing bigger and bigger. And then, coincidentally, how fitting is it on the same day where we have another Unite the Kingdom, suddenly this guy is saying, oh, I might be resigning from office. I think it's time to finally hang up the gloves. This is not that all that surprising, but I will point out it did not come without a fight. Because earlier in the week, very interestingly, Starmer was insistent, I'm going to stay in office. I'm going to be the prime minister, to which I really asked the question, why? Theoretically, in principle, you would think if leftists really care so much about democracy that after looking at his 13% approval rating and noticing the resounding mandate against the leftists that the British populace sent in the council elections, a true democratic prime minister would say, okay, now is the time to dissolve parliament and call the new general elections right now, because that's how their system works, right? They can do it anytime between now and I believe it's 2029. But of course, he's not doing that. He's trying to delay the election so that he can stay in power. And for whatever reason, even if he's going to continue being in office or something, that he thinks he's the right guy to be leading the Labour Party right now, of course, that is of all ridiculous. But that happened, and then now he's reversing on that. Likewise, I would point out he did, of course, try to sabotage and mess with the Unite the Kingdom rally, not just by calling them far-right or extremists or whatever, but even trying to revoke tourist visas from other people across, especially Europe, who were slated to show up. This includes members of the European Parliament, who he's basically banning as domestic terrorists or national security threats. Where have we seen that one before? But magically, it's very interesting. Even though he's trying to slander Unite the Kingdom as this foreign influence outside bot thing, in the same way the Democrats say Russia this, Russia that, or Qatar or whatever about MAGA, right? Notice how, no, these movements, unlike yours, unlike international leftism, are actually, by and large, organic, coming from people. And even when you try to take the money or the foreign influence away, people still show up. Funny how that works. But anyways, we'll get into all of this here today. I want to give you the full chronicle. So first of all, the report, right, that Keir Starmer is planning his resignation, why that's happening. Of course, combining it with a lot of political developments that have been happening recently in the UK. And last thing I'd like to note as well is maybe the way in which the Canada effect has been avoided in the UK and a lot of Europe. You're not really watching that happen. And what we mean by that is, of course, you may remember in the Canadian general elections of last year, the Conservatives were on track to win. And then all of a sudden, the Trump deranged populists, when the Liberal Party made the election about Trump, all the Canadians voted for the party who was super unpopular and they were about to remove from office. But very interestingly, right, over right now in the UK, the same thing you could argue is happening in the sense that Keir is in a very public feud with our president, yet you notice electorally and politically, the people aren't buying it. It's not working. And so maybe it's because Europe is further away, UK is more distant from America, whatever it is. But I'm very glad to see, right, the TDS effect is not translating to other European right-wing parties rising up and beating the left, which is certainly good news. I mean, I certainly believe that Keir thought maybe the whole Strait of Hormuz drama would gain him some popularity because it's like, oh, look, he's going against Trump. And by the way, trying to appeal to his Muslim Islamic voter base, and neither of those were successful. So we'll discuss that as well, guys. But let's get into all of this. First, though, do us a favor. If you enjoy our content, make sure you hit that like button down below. Subscribe to the channel if you are new. That is the best way to support our work, and it also ensures that you can stay up to date with all of the latest news and coverage. And that said, since we didn't talk about this, I'd like to briefly report on the UK council elections that took place last week. So as you can see, the results here are a major victory for the Nigel Farage Reform Party. You may remember that's the famous guy who led Brexit and all that. Now he's trying to build a new, different party outside of the old conservative Tory party. But look at these numbers here, right? So you have Reform UK gained a net of over 1,300 seats. Labour lost over 1,200. It was that freaking bad. So much so, actually, that many members of Keir Starmer's own left-wing Labour Party started calling for him to resign. This included a list of over 70 Labour MPs that are potentially all triggering a leadership contest to replace him as Prime Minister. And I have to say, this whole chronicle rings eerily similar, does it not, to the Joe Biden situation. And in fact, Keir Starmer is a leader I've compared a lot to Joe Biden, not because it's the same in that they're both senile, but for their own different reasons. They portray this total lack of cluelessness and lack of leadership. You know, Joe Biden, it was because he had early onset dementia, but sure, Keir Starmer just doesn't have it. You know, he just genuinely is that out of place. Clearly, you know, I always look at this guy and I think to myself, how is he even the Prime Minister of the UK? He just looks like this bumbling fool. You know, he looks fit to be maybe a teacher or something, public teacher, but even then, I don't know, he'd be one of those that the kids are always like acting up in class and he has no control. You know, that's the type of guy he is. But nonetheless, you notice the chronicle here, because think back to 2024. You had a disaster. If there was any, Joe Biden, even before the debate, seemed like he was going to lose. But you have that disaster debate where you're thinking maybe that's our chance to get back in. And then for about a month or so, Biden remains defiant. I'm not going to resign. I'm staying in the race. Even while, does this sound familiar? A bunch of other Democrats after that debate are saying, we need to have him resign. We need to have a new candidate here. Same situation with Starmer, right? When you combine everything, but especially those council elections, he initially came out after this vote and claimed that he was going to stay in office and he's going to fight till the end, even while there's rumblings from within his own party. Hey, this is not working. And I'm going to make another prediction here as well that maybe we have to watch out for, is that much like the Biden-Kamala thing, I would argue the reason the Labour Party wants to replace Starmer is so that they can get a new face in there, right? Because they understand the toxicity, the horrible approval rating, the fact that Starmer is associated with every single failure of the UK, whether that's economic, whether that's crime, whether that's migration, all of these things together. And so they're basically hoping that by doing the switcheroo, right? Because we saw the same thing Trudeau and Carney, we saw the same thing Biden, Kamala. Now they're trying to do the same thing. Oh, maybe if we run a different candidate who claims to be separate from Starmer, even though their policies are the exact same, people will fall for it. Well, I'd point out historically that stuff doesn't actually go all that well, but you know, it's certainly a trick here they're going to pull, and that's a desperation move. And I would argue that's the real reason the Labour Party is doing this, right? They're trying to, you know, do the same desperate move to save their political ambitions that we've seen many do before. All right, so that said, so that was the election. And then, of course, today we watch as a massive crowd of Unite the Kingdom protesters takes to the streets to demand mass deportations and many other things. But especially, right, given the results of last week's council elections, another big demand here is we want new elections. Keir Starmer should resign. He should at the very least dissolve parliament and let the people choose new leadership, because the message here being sent is very resounding. And it is Starmer who is, you know, stubbornly pretending as if he has the will of the British people in mind, when of course he doesn't. Yeah, so when you put those two things together, it's really not a good look for Starmer, because not only do you lose the council elections by landslide, but then after you stubbornly refuse to leave office and maintain that we're going to do fine and everything's okay, a week later you have massive protests out in the streets basically against you. You know, that's the point where the temperature is rising on that metaphorical hot seat, right? It just feels like everything about you is coming undone and the Labour Party's in total collapse. And of course it is. We're seeing that both in terms of the kind of normal reaction from people in the streets, the protesting, but also translating to elections. So very often we look at protest movements and we say, well, that's just online, or that's like this selected crowd of people. But clearly, at least in Britain, that is not the case. You know, it's typically right wingers do not have passion to protest. We're not like the left where for any time, any Saturday, we're out there just screaming no kings or something. No, when we protest, especially in large numbers, it's because we're actually fired up. We're actually angry. And there's a lot of us who want to get together and do it. And that is, of course, the case. And it's something, frankly, that Starmer knows, which is exactly why him and his leftist buddies tried to play a bunch of different games this weekend in order to stop or shut down or muddy the waters of the protests. One strategy they employed was trying to send left-wing agitators to counter-rally effectively against Unite the Kingdom. And let me point out, they know exactly what they're doing here. They're going to try to provoke and engage, and then maybe hopefully if there's some physical altercation that breaks out, they're going to say, look at the violent right-wingers or something like that, right? And then likewise, you know, maybe try to steal the thunder, cause some drama. But of course, they ran into a huge problem, these leftists who tried to show up and maybe stop Unite the Kingdom in one way or another, which is they were, of course, much like the council elections, by the way, massively outnumbered and humiliated. Take a look.
At this time to take that person out of the crowd. But 11 arrests so far, huge crowds already, as we can see, going right the way back along. Stewards at the front. The stewards will manage the crowd. Now, if operationally, if there were a skirmish that broke out, I'm just speaking hypothetically here, in the middle of this big street here, of this big throng of people, how would police deal with that?
And of course, as usual, leftists always look like this. I feel like I'm staring at an actual caricature of what right-wingers would say a libtard is. But no, it is just that person. You know, that's just completely the case. Yeah, tells you a lot, honestly, you know. But anyways, that aside, you notice how despite maybe, I guess, there were a handful of altercations or something like that, by and large, the left-wing counter attempt completely failed. You can tell the massive difference in crowd size. You can tell the difference in the type of crowd who's showing up as well. I think it often seems to be the case that when leftists gather in public and show themselves to the world, they actually discredit themselves in a number of ways, if you know what I mean by that. By the way, you look at, so one side of the crowd is waving British and English flags. The other side is waving Palestine flags. And, you know, which side here actually stands for the United Kingdom? It's a big mystery to me. I don't know. Half of them are dressed as like Taliban, basically, you know, but that's Britain for you, right? I guess that's modern Britain. You have the British people and then you have these people. What else can we say? But as I said, you know, by and large, a massive failure. But it didn't stop there, because Keir Starmer, likewise, was basically, as he's done this before, but he's basically trying to slander these Unite the Kingdom events as being bought by outside foreign influence or something, right? Kind of like the Russia thing in a new skin. And point out, is saying the following, right? I'll always champion peaceful protests, but the Unite the Kingdom march organizers are peddling hatred and division. Well, is it peaceful protest or is it not? But nonetheless, we've already blocked visas for supposed far-right agitators who want to come here to spew their extremist views. So that is right. They're banning supposed far-right agitators from the country so that way they can't show up and speak at Unite the Kingdom.
Tomorrow's march in London is a reminder of what we're up against in the battle of our values. The organisers, including convicted thugs and racists, are peddling hatred and division, plain and simple. Their goal is to convince people that Britain's problems are caused by those living alongside them. But that is not the Britain that I know. This is a country built on decency, fairness and respect. A country that is at its best when people from different backgrounds come together in common purpose. This is our country, with a majority who share those values, a majority who may not always be as loud, but must always define who we are. So, my government will not stand in the way of peaceful protest, but we will act decisively against hatred. We will use the full force of the law when that hatred manifests as violence. And we will ban those coming into the UK who seek to stir it up, as we have done already.
Yeah, so multiple ironies there that need to be discussed. First and foremost, Keir, you talk about the majority. What majority? I'm looking at the election results right now. I'm not really seeing the evidence that supposedly the majority of the British populace are these woke leftists who are enjoying all of the mass migration from Afghanistan and Pakistan and think we need about 10 million, perhaps 10 billion more. Looks to be quite the opposite, but I'm not exactly sure. And then secondly, you notice how the only time the leftists are tough on migration, right? The only time they want strong borders and they're going to ban people from the country who don't align with our values is when right-wing activists want to show up to give a speech at an event, you know? I've said before in the past that Keir Starmer is like an evil genie because when the people said, hey, we want you to do something about illegal migration, he said, okay, oh, you said illegal migration? Okay, here's a digital ID. That's exactly what you wanted. And the people said, we didn't want digital ID. We wanted you to do deportations. We wanted you to turn away these supposed asylum seekers. But he's like, no, that's what you asked for. Same thing with the Strait of Hormuz. Trump says, hey, can you get involved? Can you come help? Oh, yeah, sure, we'll come help. After everything is all settled and we're going to sit there until a peace deal is reached and then come in after the peace deal. That's what you wanted though, right, Trump? You wanted help with the Strait of Hormuz? No, that's useless. And then same situation here. People are like, hey, can you do deportations? And he says, oh, you wanted deportations? Okay, let's ban some random Polish parliament member from the UK. See, I believe in strong borders, right? But, you know, pretty hilarious how that, of course, works. I would further note here, though, that a lot of the people that Keir is banning under this pretense of national security are objectively not national security risks. For one example, one of the people that Keir revoked any travel visa from includes Polish European Parliament member Dominik Tarczynski, who you may recognize this guy. You know, this is a pretty prominent conservative figure, speaker and all that. But I'd point out, this guy's a part of the EU Parliament. An institution that Britain, let's not forget, was a part of until about 5 to 6 years ago. Okay, so part of the EU, he notes here, he's traveling on a diplomatic passport, and the UK and Poland don't have any, sanctions against each other, and yet slandering him as this national security threat or some type of terrorist person simply because he was going to speak at Unite the Kingdom, that's the type of person they're actually kicking out here in the name of supposed national security. But, you might sit here and say, oh, Vince, but they're being tough on borders. They're kicking out people from the country who don't align with their values. What's the issue? I guess I respect it to an extent. Like, I guess I understand that. But that's the entire point, is it not? Right? The people are asking you to deport millions of these supposed asylum seekers and illegal migrants who are just living in the country taking government benefits. And he's like, oh, you wanted to deport people? Hey, let's deport the member of the European Parliament. Clearly, he's a tax negative, right? Clearly, he is opposing terroristic threats, not our massive communities of crazy jihadis. So just going to point that out. But, what's to be expected, right? This is what desperation looks like. This is political desperation. When you're losing, that's when you try to do this very stretching crackdown that doesn't really make sense. But hey, anything to make it seem like Unite the Kingdom is really this foreign event when it's not, because Keir is sort of out of options here. On the other hand, I'd also note that, quite hilariously, one foreigner that Keir Starmer did not ban from the event and who actually spoke today was the one and only Nick Shirley, who, I think it's actually quite hilarious here. So he's willing to ban members of the EU, right? He banned Dominic, he banned that Eva girl. I think there's someone from Spain. That's all fine. But notice how Keir has not banned a single American conservative from the country. We know the reason for that too, by the way. He's scared of our president. He doesn't want any diplomatic issues there. So apparently American right-wingers, you know, we can go over to the UK just fine and not get arrested. That's our American privilege. But if you're someone that doesn't have Trump leading your country and you're conservative, apparently you're just banned from the country. Yeah, what a desperate attempt. The supposed open borders people, they love diversity so much unless it's a white European conservative coming to speak, right? But anyways, we put that all together, though, long story short, the crackdown attempts not successful. Keir Starmer just looks dumber every single time he opens his mouth. And that is exactly why, as of tonight, we just got the news. After all the public defiance and everything, Keir Starmer, according to the Daily Mail, is now planning his resignation, saying in private that he wants it to be quote-unquote orderly. In other words, they want to figure out and anoint the next successor and make the exit clean, but this is apparently something that is happening. Keir sees the writing on the wall. And much like Biden, you'd have to assume that this is not something happening completely voluntarily, but after the election results and after the fact that, again, over 70 members of his own party are calling for him to get out of the way, the political pressure is mounting. And in a sense, you could say he probably is being cooed out of office. That's what's explaining the complete about face here. And I'm sure some people will say, oh, this is just a media report. It's coming from the Daily Mail. Can it be believed? Here's my thing. I don't think it matters. I think given the just political circumstance, this is an inevitability. You may remember that both Biden and Justin Trudeau, before they eventually decided to bow out of the next election, were sort of playing very similar types of games, but the writing was on the wall the entire time. And then even further, I'd say either way, it doesn't matter. I mean, I believe it will just become politically impossible for Keir Starmer not to resign. His own party's driving him out. But even if they make the very stupid decision or he stubbornly wants to stay in place, okay, you know what? And to an extent, I would say even better. Because as I noted in the beginning, probably the only reason they want Starmer to resign is so that they can try to figure out someone new to lead the party who's a little bit less toxic, probably a little bit just less known to the people. So that way it's not this just totally horrible guy here that's the big bad face of the Labour Party. So that's what it's all really about. So I would say even then, so if Keir doesn't resign, you may ask, so is that a political defeat for the right? Is that a bad thing for us? No, that's a good thing for us. That's actually even better. I mean, we're going to sit there, we're going to laugh at Starmer resigning, because it's basically the Labour Party admitting that they failed, admitting that it's not going well for them. But even if they don't, if they want to ride it to the end, okay, so then whenever the next general election happens, it's going to be even worse for them. You know, go ahead with that. Perfectly fine with that, you know. And as I further said in the beginning, notably too, you have to pay attention to how the Trump effect here is not working the same way it did in Canada. You know, the British people probably care a lot less about that whole situation. The anger towards Keir is a lot more focused and concentrated. And by the way, I guess you could also just say this is not Canada. So Keir certainly thought that maybe going into the council elections, he was going to try to use the little public drama with Trump to gain some sympathy, right? It's not me. Same thing, right? Same thing with United Kingdom. He's always trying to paint this image that, oh, it's not me who's failing as a leader. It's these like outside far right sources from all around the world, whether that's a guy from the Polish parliament or Donald Trump or something like that. The international right is your true enemy, not me. And then notice how people just don't buy it. No, he just keeps getting squashed in every election, in every political issue. It goes on and on. It's over for Keir Starmer. Either way, it's over for Keir Starmer. So that's what I'm going to declare. Whether he resigns or not, which I think he will, and I do believe these reports to an extent, even if it doesn't happen, we don't care, right? Either way, it is done for this guy, and that much should be obvious. But anyways, that said, guys, let me know your thoughts on this news in the comment section down below. Be sure to leave a like on this video, subscribe to the channel if you are new, and until next time, God bless and peace.